Anh Vang Pao itu haya. Please welcome General Vaj Pov's son, Vang.
Giáo sư, Gia trọng độ, good evening. Ở cho bây giờ cái phần lớn số tụ cho nên cái gì, cái năng cho trả cái không cho yêu, cho nó cho chữ sinh theo chất tinh chấp lợi, và bây giờ cũng tụt trò, họ cả bây giờ này phần bao bỏ nữa. Nè, giờ nè mua phèn, và chỉ này phần cái tụt trò thôi đi sẽ là nó về, giờ cho nè mà. These are our veterans. I've asked them to stand so we can applaud them. That's why we're here tonight. Okay, make sure there's a team by the đầu tiên là tây trung cả. Thì cũng cho luôn nó nói thì cũng là in đam mong, thế cũng là in đam mỹ cả. Rồi lại gọi là tạo tao, bao, cho bây trên hình mong được diễn trì. To our elected officials at all levels, from the federal to the state, to the county, to the city. There's a long list, so I'm not going to be holding any specific names, but welcome and thank you for being here. We may not fathom or understand the full gravity of why we're here tonight on a Tuesday night, that my wife and I drove all the way from down south to be here as well. And the significance and the provenance of tonight, the 14th of May, which many of us in this room do know of, but maybe a few of us don't, is the day my father, General Vang Pao, departed what we call the old country of Laos. This began the exodus of the Hmong to many new countries, including our country, the United States of America today. And it is on May 14th that we mark every single year, and this happens to be the 49th year for the Hmong being here in America now. Next year, we're celebrating our 50th. So I'm sure here in the city of Merced, like from day one, 49 years ago, the Hmong became family here in Merced, your neighbors, members of the community, and positively contributed back to their homes, to their neighborhoods, and to their communities. But beyond that, on this day, the 14th, the story that binds us together, and everywhere I go, and I was just recently in Washington, D.C., and I've had the honor and privilege to be by my father's side, to learn about not just the historical facts, but who he really was. And I met a lot of different folks from different walks of life that are not Hmong, but they all tell the same story about the Hmong. And the Hmong story that is interwoven into the American story now dates back to 1961. A young president, John F. Kennedy, just assumed office, but prior to that, his predecessor, President Dwight Eisenhower, had one of those transitional meetings back in December. And the single most important thing that President Eisenhower told President Kennedy, your single largest issue was going to be the containment of communism spreading throughout the world. In those times, geopolitical play was a humongous thing in the world. And so President John F. Kennedy inherited what the administration before it under Eisenhower left off. So upon assuming the Oval Office, President Kennedy authorized the Central Intelligence Agency to start the containment of communism in Southeast Asia. And at that time, American society, the American public, the United States of America had no idea about this foreign land located in Southeast Asia. They knew of Vietnam, they knew of Thailand, they knew of Cambodia, and Malaysia, and Singapore, and the Philippines, and China, and so on and so forth. But Laos, they have no clue. Fortunately, my father had established himself with the French. He joined the French Volunteer Corps at a very young age to fight the imperialist Japanese. So within the alliance between France and the United States, one day, through discussions in DC, the French said, hey, you know, we've worked with many different groups in Southeast Asia. And a group called the Hmong, they're a very, you know, efficient group. They're not only well disciplined, but they're warriors at heart. And above all, they love to be free. They want no suppression, no oppression, no one to dictate to them. And so if you're looking for somebody that you can count on, that you can depend on and trust, the Hmong are your people. So President Kennedy took that, instructed the CIA to go to this landlocked Southeast Asian nation called Laos, tucked between Thailand and Vietnam, to look for the Hmong. But they weren't just looking for the Hmong, they were looking for one man in particular, and that's my father, because he had served with the French and established himself. And then the CIA sent a young colonel at that time named Colonel Belair to mountain steeps of Laos, through jungles and dense, forests to look for this young man named Vang Pao. Took Colonel Belair almost 3-4 days to locate him, because my father was always on the move. And eventually, when contact was first made, all Colonel Belair said was, the United States of America needs your help. We're giving you the time to think and process this, but the United States government is requesting for the Hmong to fight on behalf of the United States of America here in Laos. Now let me dive a little bit. Why did Colonel Belair say that? A treaty was signed between the United States and the world superpowers at that time, the Soviet Union and China included, that no combat boots from either country would be allowed or permitted in these countries that were considered neutral. However, knowing the Russians and the Chinese and their ideology, they signed onto that document, but they had advisors and troops everywhere, violating that agreement. And the Americans were right off their tail. They knew exactly what they were going to do regardless. So Colonel Belair met my father, had a quick discussion, lasted about an hour long, and my father had a decision to make. And this is where I had personal conversations with my father before he passed. How did you come down to the decision? And all he said to me was, son, it was easy. It was easy for me to make, because regardless which answer I gave back to Belair, conflict and war and bloodshed was on our doorstep. If it was not going to be with the Americans, the communists were going to come and bother us the same. And we would have to side with them, fighting in conflict, in bloodshed and war. There was going to be no peace regardless. So because we are a freedom-loving people, and I have a duty and responsibility to take care of my people, communism wasn't the way to go. Freedom and democracy was the way to go. And so for my father, it was a quick decision in response to Colonel Belair. And 2 weeks right after January 9th and 10th of 1961, on the 23rd and 24th, U.S. arms and weapons arrived in Laos. And the first 300 Hmong soldiers that my father quickly recruited started training. And that's where our story, that's where our alliance, that's where our brotherhood, and that's what I told our U.S. lawmakers in D.C. The Hmong became Americans without even knowing America on that day. And for 15 years, the Hmong are our heroes, our warriors here, who are still with us today, and we're very fortunate that they are. Fought to not only contain communism, but to defend freedom itself. Whether it be for US interests, or the Hmong interests, or the free people of the world's interests, we fought. And my father was the gentleman, all sides, the United States, the Royal Kingdom of Laos, the Hmong, the ethnic groups, all trusted to lead them. And he did for 15 years. And so for 15 years, as the gentleman that spoke in Hmong earlier, 3 objectives were given to the Hmong. One was to disrupt the communist supply lines on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. 2 was to help rescue downed US pilots who were fortunate enough to eject over into friendly territory. And sometimes we may have thought it was friendly, but the front lines were always shifting. And so sometimes they bailed out over what they thought was or assumed friendly, but then it was now enemy territory. And many of their comrades had to fight their way through to rescue these US pilots, some of whom we were unable to retrieve to this day. And they are missing in action, as Diane pointed out. And third was to protect US strategic sites that were top secret at that time, like the Kupati radar site was a US Air Force personnel and an operated radar right on the border overlooking into North Vietnam from Laos that covered the entire airspace of Hanoi. And so for a couple of years, US B-52s and F-111s and bombers flew over North Vietnam, strategically bombing sites, and the North Vietnamese and the communists couldn't figure out how we, the Americans, were so successful at our bombing raids until word eventually leaked out about Kupati, and they launched day and night raids on that small mountaintop, and 12 US Air Force men lost their lives. What would become one of the largest single loss of US Air Force personnel in history of the United States Air Force in combat. So those are the 3 objectives assigned to the Hmong, but then of course it branched down and expanded beyond that. Now came today, May 14th, when the Hmong had to put everything down, including their weapons, their livelihoods in their homeland, and flee. The communists were now on the rise. They were gaining momentum. And the Hmong had to make a quick decision to leave. My father and Colonel Belair and the US government at that time, only a handful of senior officials knew about the Hmong fighting on behalf of the US, quickly orchestrated an evacuation of the Hmong. 3,000 Hmong were airlifted out of the small airfield in Long Kin to Thailand, without papers, without fuss. These were my father's lieutenants and their families and their children that my father knew that if they fell into the hands of the communists, they would be instantaneously exterminated. So the US government quickly ordered aircrafts into the small airfield day and night for 4 days, right around this time. Evacuated my father's junior and senior officials, they left Laos. And today, the 14th, which was the last day of the 4 days, my father made his final decision to leave the old country too. And they all went to Thailand first, and then he went to 14 days in France. The French government took him around touring the French countryside. He didn't like it. Yeah, he didn't like it. He said, I can't bear with this. Even though he loves it. And then eventually, due to the situation with the refugees now, the influx of refugees of Hmong coming from the Lao border over to the Thai, my father had to do something to help his people. And so he flew straight to Washington, D.C. And there he advocated and he lobbied. He had to educate a lot of US lawmakers who knew nothing about the Hmong. Okay. This war was dubbed the secret war, and one thing before I forget, so as you see up here, SGU veterans, and you may question, what does SGU stand for? Okay, and General Vang Pao didn't come up with that. The Hmong didn't come up. That is the acronym for Special Guerrilla Units. And it was the name designated by the Central Intelligence Agency itself to classify the Hmong ethnic warriors. So that's what SGU is. I know this may be repetitive for some of us, but I love to tell the story because it always reminds us of who we are and why we're here. So that's what SGU stands for. And so you may hear Lao veterans, you may hear Hmong veterans, or Southeast Asian veterans, or even Vietnam vets, but the real correct name is the SGU veterans, the Special Guerrilla Units. And that is the official name recognized by the US government and the Central Intelligence Agency, which over the course of the last decade, they began to declassify a lot of information about what they call the Hmong Project. Okay, but the Hmong Project was basically a special military program to train and equip foreigners to fight because US forces could not fight. And we see that sort of this platform, sort of this format implemented in Ukraine today. Okay, so we all share commonality here. And so the Hmong Project was one of the very first projects for US foreign overseas forces. And so I share this bit of history, this bit of education with all our elected officials here, moving forward into our future together as a community, as a family, as an American family. That what we all fight for on a daily basis may be different from one another as we go about. We may have differences, we may have debate about this and that, and disagreements, and that's okay. What binds us together as Americans is this banner right here. The Star-Spangled Banner. Old Glory. Stars and Stripes. It has many names. Star-Spangled Banner is also the name of our national anthem, like I teach many of the Hmong youths. Okay? But this is what symbolizes and enshrines everything about us. Freedom, freedom, and freedom. Without this, we would have no freedom. Without this that we don't uphold and fight for, we would not have democracy and our liberties and our rights. But because we all fight for this banner today, as there are Hmong Americans in the United States Armed Forces today doing the same as their forefathers did before that, we are all interwoven together, my dear friends. That is what makes us a community. It's what makes us a city. It's what makes us as a country. And those are values we must never forget as we proceed on with life on a daily basis, on a normal basis. And so I share this piece with our elected officials, that moving forward, if my father could be here today, he would say to his people, like City Council, our people, we must continue to be good citizens, law-abiding citizens, hard workers, as you all know them to be. But we must teach generation after generation beyond this who we are and what our duties and responsibilities are. And that was always so sacred to my father, as you can see through his legacy. And it's what he's always preached to the Hmong Americans, that we must always be good citizens, no matter what country we live in. And they are a shining example of that. Many of them came to this country without knowing how to read and write. Yet they hit the ground rolling. They're just natural survivors. But then now their kids, their children, their daughters, their sons, and grandsons and granddaughters have gone beyond what they have never imagined. And that is because due to our great country and the liberties that we have, the opportunities that we have, that all of us have family and even individually have sacrificed in the name of the United States of America. And so we will and shall continue to do our part, interwoven in our American family. And so to our elected officials, as the youngest son of General Vang Pao, I restrike our commitment and solidarity to work with you as our elected officials, to our representatives at all levels, that you can count your family here in to be on your side. You can trust them because they've never once wavered or betrayed. And I think I need not say any more than that as well. So that is the solemn commitment that we strike here tonight. That we are one and we will move forward, tackling whatever challenges and obstacles that stand in our way, whether we agree or disagree, that's okay. The bigger picture is what matters the most. And now, so I will transition over to Monk to speak to our heroes and warriors. So if you would forgive me for that too.